1980 hunger strike began on the 27th of October. 7 prisoners in the H blocks, Brendan Hughes, Leo Green, Tom McFeely, Sean McKenna, Tommy McKerney, John Nixon and Raymond McCartney, refused breakfast that Monday morning. They did so to assert their right, and that of all Republican prisoners, to be accorded political status. Talk of hunger strike had been in the offing for weeks, when it was announced that there was obvious concern for the health and welfare of the 7, but equally there was resolve to ensure that all that could be done in support and solidarity with the prisoners and their 5 demands. The 5 demands were basic. Indeed, the British government had previously conceded similar demands in 1972 in recognising the reality of political imprisonment in Ireland. The National H Block Armagh Committee organised a campaign on the streets around the hunger strike. The gravity of 7 men on hunger strike after years of inhuman and degrading treatment in the H blocks spurred the people onto the streets in their thousands to support the 7 hunger strikers and their demands. From Ballymurphy to Ballina, from Tyrone to Tipperary, from Navan to New York, protests were organised on a daily basis, sometimes twice and 3 in any given day. There were sit-down protests, candlelight vigils, pickets, marches, rallies, and campaigners took over public buildings. Such collective activism, the mass movement of people on the streets, was last seen in the civil rights movement of the 1960s, as each person rallied to the demands, standing with and for each other and all standing as one with those on hunger strike. The sole focus was to force the British to recognise that the men and women in Long Kesh and Armagh prison were political prisoners.
We and my 6 comrades are prepared to go through with this, and we are prepared to die to prove that we are special prisoners and our 5 basic demands are just.
There is no doubt that the political establishment in London, Belfast and Dublin were unaware or in denial of the strength of feeling and support for the hunger strikers, as they witnessed the marches, the pickets and the rallies of people on the streets. The impact of the H Block Armagh campaign, both inside and outside, broke down the wall of silence. It was an issue that could no longer be denied or ignored, despite a largely compliant media. As the street protests continued, on December the 1st the hunger strike took a dramatic step when 3 of the women in Armagh prison, Mairead Farrell, Mary Doyle and Mairead Nugent, joined the fast. They were soon to be followed by another 22 H Block prisoners on the 15th of December. The pressure intensified as reports of the prisoners becoming weaker emerged from the prison hospital, where the 7 were now being held. In the diplomatic and political interventions, some public and private, some well-intentioned, but others to undermine the prisoners, speculation prevailed that there was hope for an acceptable solution in the offing, with the priest acting as a go-between between the prisoners' leadership and the British government. On the 18th of December, the priest met with Brendan Hughes in the prison hospital and detailed the content of a document which the British government was about to publish. The priest outlined in detail to Brendan that the core of the 5 demands were in place. The condition of Sean McKenna was now deteriorating rapidly, with the doctor stating that he was close to death. Brendan Hughes, with the reassurances from the priest as to the significance of the document as a means to realise the 5 demands, asked the doctor to intervene to assist Sean and called an end to the hunger strike. After 53 days the hunger strike ended, but as time and circumstances unfolded, and through bad faith by the British government, in particular the Northern Ireland Office, it did not bring an end to the prisoners' campaign for political status. Tonight, 40 years on, as this was happening, we have 3 of those who were in hunger strike: Raymond McCartney, Mary Doyle and Donogha McNeilis, and who will recall and reflect on events of the 18th of December 1980 and their subsequent impact. Our discussion tonight will be guided by Martina Anderson, herself a political ex-prisoner, and we thank everyone for joining us.
Well, it's more an honour, Féin Shaw, not. It is an honour to be here tonight with Raymond, Mary and Donogha. You three on the screen here, you epitomise unbowed and unbroken Republicans who individually endured a lot to ensure that our struggle would not be criminalised. I'm going to immediately go into questions because that's what everyone wants to hear. So can I ask, Mary, I'm going to start with you. Can I ask you about what you went through to be accorded political status, the efforts that you and the other women made to be recognised as political prisoners? You know, can you tell us about the events that led up to you, Mairead Farrell, Mairead Nugent, going on hunger strike?
Well, after we were sentenced, we went on a no work protest because there was no uniforms in Armagh jail, so we were allowed to wear our own clothing. So we were on a no work protest, which resulted in us being locked all day. And then February 1980, they sent in the Screws, mob-handed, a general search, which resulted in us being forced onto the no wash. So that was from February 80, as I said. And then, I mean, obviously the men had been on the blanket for years before that. So it was then during that summer that we knew that this couldn't go on as it was, that we had to try something else. And the next thing that that we all thought of, was a hunger strike was the only other avenue to go. So obviously that wasn't something you took lightly. We were all told to go away and think about it long and hard. And you just couldn't obviously think of yourself. I mean, I had to think of my own family. My daddy wasn't in great health. My mummy had been murdered a couple of years earlier by the UVF. I was the eldest of two younger brothers. But it was a case of I wouldn't expect somebody else to do something I wouldn't do. So therefore, I put my name forward, as did Maria and Margaret.
Donogha, you and 21 other prisoners joined the hunger strike on the 15th of December. What led you to go on hunger strike?
Well, I suppose they go back a bit. You know, the protest had been ongoing in the blocks from 1976, the No Wash protest from 1978, but I think during that year of 1980, I think there have been more and more people thinking about what the next step would be in terms of getting political status and achieving our 5 demands. In the early part of 1980, Colonel Fee and Bishop Daly were involved in discussions with the NIO, trying to get a resolution. And well, I wasn't privy, and very few of us in the blocks were privy to what was happening during those discussions. But I do remember round about September 1980, Brendan Hughes, who was OC of the blocks and was in H3, went out on a visit. And when he came back, he wasn't looking too happy on his way up the yard. Some of us were able to see him walking up the yard, escorted by a screw. But that night, if I recall correctly, we were in D Wing, and Brendan Hughes was in C Wing, along with Bobby Sands, Brendan McFarland, and others. And that night, Bobby Sands actually shouted over in Asgaelic that the talks had failed, and that the camp staff had made a decision that Baymaid Zigdal or Stalk Akrish Hon Bash, we will be going on hunger strike till death. He then went on to say that people would be asked to forward their names if they were prepared to go on hunger strike, and that the hunger strike itself would start on the 20th of October. Now, eventually the hunger strike didn't start until the 27th. I have to say, but whenever, even though there have been discussion about this eventuality, when you hear it spelled out like that quite bluntly, it's very scary, because you're now in the reality of a hunger strike to death. And we knew what the British were capable of. We knew that they let Frank Stagg and Michael Gahan die just a few short years before that. So we were under no illusions about where we were at that stage and how this could develop.
Raymond, you were on hunger strike for 53 days. So can I ask you about the lead up to that day on the 27th of October? The 4 years of brutality and deprivation endured by you all before you decided to embark on a hunger strike?
Yes, and the thing that I always remember, the thing that really struck me the most is I was sentenced in January 1979. I went on the protest on Saturday the 13th of January, and I was, on the wing. I was sharing a cell with Emma McDermott, who was sentenced along with me. But the thing that struck me, and it struck both of us, was that every night, or frequently, when discussions came round about the protest, where it was at and where it was going, very much on people's lips, thoughts, and nearly their instinct was that the way the prison struggle had been resolved in the past, previously in 1972, as we all know, was by hunger strike. That was the thing that struck me the most. I think the second thing, I've been on remand for the best part of 2 years. I spent much of that down in the Hitch blocks, although on remand with our own clothes. But we had a sense of what was unfolding in the blocks, and we were following it both by, the communication on the outside, and then obviously meeting, as we did frequently, the prisoners on visits, short snatches of conversations with them. And I think, when we came down into the blocks and started to talk to some of the people who were there a few years, was the sheer brutality that they had withstood, and when I came down, they had just introduced this new search outside the visits, which was absolutely horrendous, especially for myself and Eamon, because we were just on the protest, and this was like nearly your first baptism to the sort of sheer intensity and brutality of the searching. And again, when you came back from the visit, and that night, the OC of the wing would have asked people, who was out on a visit today, what was it like, blah, 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 and, what news, what scale, that type of stuff. And I remember at that time I hadn't great Irish, but Eamon had, and a lot of people who were speaking in Irish. But when they talked about the Curragh, the search, they would have said Morris Gra. And I said to Eamon, what does Morris Gra mean? He says, the normal, right? And I remember saying to myself, sweet loving God, if this is normal, what's the abnormal? And that was the sort of, and I remember having that discussion and having it, afterwards, is it particularly, and I don't say it's the men in Hitch 3 and Hitch 4, for a very sustained period, the administration went at them. Now, Hitch 5 was getting it, but they weren't getting it with the same intensity. But there was absolutely no doubt that the administration went at the prisoners very, very, very much to break them, very much to drive them off the protest. And this year we've seen in the the excellent report edited by Phil Scraton, just the intensity, and not only just the intensity, but the strategic way that the British government allowed the prison administration to basically try and break prisoners by physical abuse. So that's the backdrop to it. So sometimes when people, fast forward to 1980, and they talk about the hunger strikes, as if the hunger strike was hatched that year, the sense to go on hunger strike. It was after 4 years of protest. It was after 4 years of suffering. And then obviously the women in Armagh from February of 1980 intensified for them. So this is the background. And there was people sort of saying that, and people were more than prepared to face this out and face it down, because they weren't going to yield to the British government. But there was a bit of sense that people were sort of saying, we need to be doing something. So that's where you had the Hitchblock Armagh campaign. That's where you had, Donnacha has alluded to, Cardinal Fake entering into those sort of talks, negotiations with the British government. But in fairness to him, he always had a sort of, and he was a man of great integrity, but he always said to Brenton Hughes, and Brenton Hughes often spoke about this, he wasn't going to lay them on. He wasn't going to pretend or say, "Oh, give me an hour, a couple of weeks." He called it, he said, and he would call it when he had to, and he did. And Donnacha talks about that day of the visit with Brendan, and that's when it changed. That's when it became different from talking about hunger strike as a tactic, talking about hunger strike as the next step in the process of our protest, to becoming something live and real. And we all were part of that discussion. And then it became that personal decision where not you were going to go on the hunger strike. And I remember that, the communique being read out the door. There is a hunger strike. We're looking for people to go forward. Laid out in very stark terms. Donnacha has alluded to, and no doubt it was the same for Mary. And then I thought about it for long and hard. I put my name forward, and even the calm, verifying that I was going to be one of the 7 people going on the hunger strike. Again, very stark. This is a hunger strike to death. No, we don't want people to die. We want the British government to yield, but there's a distinct possibility that people will die. You must have that in your head. Any doubts? This is the time now to say, this is not for me. And it was done in the most comradely way, saying, if you decide it's not for you, that there's no issue, you just send word back, and that's the end of it. Nobody will be coming back and saying, go and rethink, or maybe this, but that's where it was. And I took that decision and obviously went on hunger strike, as you've said, on the 27th of October.
Can I ask each of you about actually being on hunger strike? How did your families react? What was the contact like, even with outside? So, Donnacha, your mother Mary, there's an iconic image of her standing with 2 other Derry women outside the cathedral chapel with a poster, "Do you care?" So how did you tell your mommy, how did you tell your family, and how did they react?
The other 2 women were Carol Harkin and Kathleen McCann, and there were many other mothers and wives and daughters of prisoners who became involved in it. In actual fact, as Raymond alluded, there was a decision made that 7 men would go on hunger strike. So all the rest of us who had put our names forward, were told that has hit. There'll be 7 men going on hunger strike, and that's my recollection of the scenario. So I actually didn't discuss it with anybody in the family, and of course in those days you got 1 half-hour visit per month, and it wasn't always a case that your immediate family was up saying. Sometimes you'd have had friends up or relatives. So I actually didn't discuss it in any sort of way with the family, but I think everybody understood that there would be, and I had actually said to my mother sometime before that if there was a hunger strike, then I would consider go and put my name forward for that, and I think quite a lot of men were of a similar mind, but you had to think of it again once it came to it. So I actually didn't have any sort of deep discussion with the more or anybody else in the family about it. You discuss it more, I think, with the person you were sharing a cell with, or the person you were next door to, and there were long discussions with people, and everybody had that sort of fear that if it came to it, then there would be people dying, and as it says, as Raymond alluded to, we knew what the regime was capable of, and we knew the British government and the NIO were capable of, so that we were under no illusions about it. And I suppose by the time we came to go on hunger strike, we had actually witnessed the 7 hunger strikers, Raymond and Bren and Tom and Sean McKenna and Leo, John Nixon. They were all moved to H3, and I'm sure that they're going to talk in more detail about this. But we would see them once a week at Mass, and you could actually see the physical deterioration in all of them, but particularly in Sean McKenna, who just seemed the weight just seemed to drop off him. Sean wasn't in the big frame in any case, but you could actually see that of all 7 of the hunger strikers, he was the one that stood out the most in terms of physical deterioration.
Raymond, can I ask you about how your family reacted? Raymond, were you aware, were the 7 hunger strikers aware of the kind of protests that were taking place outside, the sit-down protests, the pickets, the marches, the rallies? I walked out of Ricola every single day, sometimes twice a day. So how was your family throughout that period, and when you told them? And then were you aware of the kind of movement and protests that were taking place outside?
It actually, I suppose it was of the day and of the time. When we were told, well, when I was told I was going hunger strike, and I'm sure the experience for 6 hour people was the same, we were told not to tell anyone. We weren't to be writing out or sending any communication outside, that we were to wait to the next visit and then tell those up in the visit, and don't change any names. They didn't want any sense who was going on the hunger strike. So the hunger strike was originally set for October the 20th. So I had a visit, in reflection, maybe about 8-9 days before that, which around maybe the 11th of October. The visit was already sent. So the 2 people up was to Brady and Molly, who were married to my 2 brothers, Jimmy and Liam, and Aaron Noel. So I had to tell them, and I had to tell them then to go and obviously give them on them the task of going to tell my mom and father. Fortunately, as fate would have it, the hunger strike was put back a week, and I was able then to get an hour visit. And by that stage, I was able to talk directly to my mom and father. Now they were aware, and thankfully, were of a disposition that they understood the reason for the hunger strike. And they're obviously asking the obvious type of questions, but always struck by my mother. My mother, in a very sort of, as she was capable of, just sort of said it very straight. If you can't do this, don't go on it. Don't be letting anybody down. So that was my mother's approach to it. So, and then, the second part of the question, were we conscious? Yes, we were, but I don't think we truly appreciated the absolute extent of it. We were, I was kept in H5 in the cell with Pat Livingstone for the first 8 days, and then moved to H3, as Donica said, and then we've seen people at Mass. And when we moved to H3, they allowed us better access to newspapers and the like of that, because it was deemed nearly hospital type wing. At Sunday at Mass, you know, the people have been giving you a bit of a briefing or talking, and not just as friends and comrades would do about what was unfolding. You were aware of it because you were getting, you know, the news. But the news then, and that's, you know, the hard part of it, the news then was a 3-minute bulletin on the air every year. You know, you just imagine that now, trying to explain that to people now with the nearly a 24-hour day news cycle. You can just imagine. But we had a good idea. But I think it was only afterwards, you know, in fairness, you know, when you started then, you know, better access, particularly during the second hunger strike, because we got access to papers more, we had more visits, and you were listening to people even during the second hunger strike. And there was an absolute intensity. You know, as you talked about your own experience, you talk to anybody of that age and older, their life was dominated by the hunger strike. You know, people were going to work, clocking in for 2 hours and clocking out. You know, I think even some of the bigger factories had an arrangement nearly that the shift it was nearly 2 hours on, a half an hour for the Hitchblock protest and the Armagh protest, and then back into work, and then an hour, 2 hours, and an hour, and all that. So yes, and I think that's, I mean, and thankfully, David Beresford his book started to talk about that, and I think over the years, as our people, because I think it's important, and for us in the coming year with the 40th anniversary, is that we need to bring them type of stories out, people's own personal experiences. I remember, I think the 25th anniversary, we done a wee exercise in Derry, and we asked people to give a particular memory of the hunger strike, and it was absolutely fascinating what their memory was. You know, people talking about school, you know, people going into school with black armbands on, or people talking about that they didn't eat the food in the canteen, all those different things. But there's absolutely no doubt about it, and that we were well aware. But I think it was in the aftermath we certainly truly appreciate it and seen the absolute extent, because to me, and I have said this, that the National Hitchblock Armagh movement, the people who rallied to the hunger strikers and to the prisoners at that time was almighty. It was absolutely immense, and people sometimes just don't appreciate themselves what they took on and what they did on our behalf. So if 40 years on it's a big bully bus to them, then it's more than deserved.
Well done. Mary, in Armagh Jail, the three of you were on hunger strike. Were you aware of the efforts that were made by the Hitchblock Armagh movement, as Raymond has talked about, and how the hunger strike mobilised international solidarity that's still with us to this day? So how was it like for the three of you being on hunger strike, and then what awareness did you have about what was happening outside?
Well, as you may be aware, there was only 30 odd women on the protest at that stage. So we had to ensure that there was a daily visit to get comms in and out from the movement outside and also from the blocks, because there was always great communication. So then when whoever had their visit would have come back and obviously brought the comms, but would have relayed to us the different protests that was happening in each area. Now, in fairness, we wouldn't have at that stage known worldwide, you know, although we were continuing our letter campaign. We smuggled comms and send them all over the world just to inform people of what was going on in the blocks and Armagh. But it wasn't, as Raymond said, maybe until after that we realised just all that was going on worldwide. I mean, we knew it was going on all over Ireland, but it was, and the Hitchblock Armagh Committee, you couldn't praise them enough. And I mean, they put their own lives at risk, but they fought for the prisoners, and you know, they done a magnificent job. I
want to take a few years to this night 40 years ago. To this day, the day the hunger strike ended on the 18th of December. And Raymond, can you walk us through how did that day unfold?
I think you would go back to the day before, and to get that sort of thread to run properly. There's no doubt that throughout the hunger strike, and in fairness to the people in terms of leadership, they try to keep us away from too much speculation, and we obviously had a quite wise sort of a position that if we were burdened with every initiative or every bit of tittle, then it would nearly put too much pressure, which I would agree with. But there's no doubt periodically, Brendan, when we were allowed to gather in the what they would have loosely called the canteen or TV room in the hospital every night. So there he would have, if necessary, would have given us a sense of anything which he felt was of any validity over and above sometimes tittle, because there was a lot of people, some of good intention were trying very, very hard, maybe interfering, if that's maybe that's too strong of a word. And then there's people of malintention, and they were maybe out to try and undermine you. So that was the mix. But there was certainly, emerging that there was a very concrete channel, and it subsequently came out that there was a priest, and he was in direct contact with our leadership and with elements within the British government, and particularly with Brendan Cusin in the hospital. So on the night of the 17th, he told us that he was, the priest had been in, and he was coming back in the next day because he felt that he was coming in with something more concrete than ever before. So the next day, the Thursday the 18th at lunchtime, the prison administration went through that routine of locking people up at 12:30 in the hospital. So we were in, that was a quiet time, and I was in the cell, and the door opened, and the priest came in. He had been in with Brendan, and Brendan had asked him to go in as well, and he said that he had been in with Brendan to give Brendan a bit of a rundown, that he was now leaving. He was going, in his opinion, he was going to receive a document that, in his opinion, because he'd been given a briefing, that had the basis, had the outline plan that could resolve the 5 demands and bring an end to the hunger strike. And that's when he left. Now, he did tell us, and we were very aware, because each night, for about the previous week, we were able to, because Sean was at this stage confined to bed. So when you were going out every night, the prison staff, even though they were told not to, in fairness, some of them allowed us to go and see him. And Sean, particularly on the Wednesday and Thursday of that week, was in a room darkened. The blinds were drawn. It was very, very dark, and he wasn't responding. He was he could hear you, but he certainly wasn't. He wasn't conscious of who was speaking to him at times. At that stage, he had got a visit with his family in the hospital, maybe the Tuesday. So that was the backdrop. Brendan was hopeful, and he told us that the night before. And then at 5:30, the door opened. The door opened at 5:30. We were out that afternoon, and he gave us a better briefing. Then at 5:30 that night, again, we were locked up from 4:30 to 5:30. The priest had been in with him, and he came out, and at 5:30, I was literally out on the corridor. I was down talking to Leo Green, and he said to both of us, "The hunger strike's over. I've asked the medics to intervene. I'm satisfied that this was all." And he said he was going down. We all went down into Tom McFeely's cell, and he gave us a better outline of it. And then Bobby Sands, Brendan asked to speak to Bobby Sands. He was brought up from H3. There was a bit of a discussion. Bobby had said he had concerns about we hadn't got the document in our hand, but that if what Brendan had outlined him and what he was aware of, then if that was the basis, then that's the basis on which we would go forward on. So that was basically how it unfolded. We were then I think it was maybe 10 o'clock before they locked the doors physically. And at that stage, the priest came, I think the priest came back in again. Certainly Brenton was given sight of the document. And the next morning, he said that he was in a fairly confident position that the document, if managed properly, if negotiated out and with good faith from the British, then it could resolve the prison dispute and bring an end to, well, have brought an end to hunger strike, but also bring an end to the blanket protest and allow us to have free association as we had demanded.
Raymond, given that you were on the hunger strike the longest, what was it like eating for the first time after 53 days that day?
And a very it's, I often say to people, we were told that the hunger strike ended at 5:30. I think the first, we didn't get anything to eat about maybe 9 o'clock in a very strange way. It was the last thing in your head. There was a sense of relief, bewilderment, and then obviously all the hour things were unfolding. One of the first things that they did do was they gave us an injection of vitamins, and there was absolutely no doubt. And I think all of us and anybody who, even in 1981 when the hunger strike ended, anybody who came off the hunger strike will always remember it was an injection that as soon as it hit your body, you knew something had changed. There was nearly like a warmth immediately went into your body. The prison doctor explained to us that he was going to give us solids, and his rationale for solids was that the body would reject a solid quicker than it would a fluid. So his concern was if he gave us a fluid that might lie in our stomachs, we couldn't reject it, therefore it could be doing damage and you wouldn't be aware of it. So they made us scrambled egg and toast, and it was very slow, and there's no doubt, and these are the things you find out now, there's no doubt your throat and down to your stomach was obviously narrowed, so it was a hard swallow. You weren't conscious of it when you were drinking water, but once you start they take the solid. So thankfully, I had no reaction. Even over the coming days afterwards, there was no reaction. And in fairness to the medical staff, and particularly the visiting consultants, they made sure that we were given, I suppose, uncharted waters, but they give us good medical care. And certainly, when you look at it, and it's one of the things I always say to people, the body is a very resilient, it is very resilient, and thankfully, in the main, notwithstanding that we lost 10 comrades in hunger strike, that many of the people who went through the hunger strike came out the other end with little or no physical sort of, if you like, hangovers for their future lives.
Mary, it was somewhat different for the three of you. 40 years will not be your anniversary until tomorrow. You were on hunger strike a day extra. Why was that? Why did you not end the hunger strike in the same time, in the same way that the men in the H blocks? Why was it different in Armagh?
Well, for the simple reason we didn't know it was over, and that was through nobody's fault on the NIO. We used to listen to our wee smuggled radio every night once the screws went off the wing. And the three of us were in the cell together in the so-called hospital wing. And that night, I'm not sure, it was the 9 or it could have been the 10 o'clock news, and we had it on very low because, as already been said, Sean McKenna was very ill at this stage, so we were very concerned. And the headlines was, the hunger strike's over. And the three of us looked at one another, did we hear that properly? So we had to wait another hour, and it was the same. But unknowns to us, Danny Morrison had tried to get into the jail that evening, but the NIO refused him. So we sort of didn't know what was going on. So the next morning, the governor and Screws come in and said, oh, that's the hunger strike over. And Mairead Farrell said, no, it's not. So we were still entitled to our hours exercise. So to get out in the yard, we had to walk through the wing that the other protesting prisoners were on. So Mairead Farrell asked to go in to see Sheila Dara, who was OC, and the two of them had a yarn about what was going on, and then Sheila got a visit. So then it was confirmed that the hunger strike was over. So it was on the 19th then that the three of us come off it.
Okay. Donica, I believe you were on the wing with Bobby Sands. Can you tell us how you all found out the hunger strike was over, and what was the reaction of the prisoners on the wing with you and the other prisoners?
Oh, actually, Bobby was in the R wing, adjacent to us, but
Right.
later on that night, I'm not sure exactly what time. I think it might have been after 9, might have even been after 10. I don't know. I can't remember correctly, and obviously didn't have watches or anything like that. But Bobby actually came on the R wing, and I was in the cell with Pat Sheehan. Both of us were on the hunger strike, and the screw went to open our cell door, and Bobby says to the screw, no, Hugh Rooney's door. Hugh Rooney was the OC of the wing, and Bobby was obviously correctly and going to the OC to report what had happened. So he was in the cell with you, I don't know, 5, maybe 10 minutes, because he was conscious. Obviously, they had to go around all the blocks and talk to the camp, the block staff in H4 and H5. So Hugh then, once Bobby had left the wing, Hugh came up the door and informed us, asked Gaelic, ten stout Ockras Cretina, the hunger strike has ended. Hugh wasn't sure exactly what the situation was, but it was clear that we hadn't got the 5 demands, but that Bobby had actually says, look, we haven't won, but we haven't lost either. And that's where that sort of the document in terms of if there was a will for the prison regime and the NIO and British government, they move forward, then we would be willing to move forward on that same basis.
Can I ask you about your feelings and reactions afterwards, after the hunger strike had ended? Mary, I heard you speak initially about feeling relieved.
Yeah.
As the day after the hunger strike unfolded, but how did you feel then, knowing that the British government had reneged?
Well, obviously, initially relieved that Sean McKenna was getting the medical assistance he needed, relieved for the families, and obviously assumed that we had got our 5 demands. But then as the days and weeks progressed, it was inevitable then that the Brits had reneged. And it was very, very frustrating. It made you so angry. But then again, we were dealing with Brits. What more could we expect? Especially with Maggie Thatcher.
Yeah. Donegal, what about yourself and the other prisoners on the wings? What was the mood like in the jail?
Well, I suppose there was that relief that no one had died, but it was also a huge degree of confusion, and there was also the realization that this wasn't over. Now, we were hopeful that that there would be a resolution, and that would come in the coming days and weeks. And I suppose in those first days after the hunger strike ended, I think that the general sort of feeling was, thank God it's over and no one has died.
Raymond, 53 days on hunger strike. in 1980. I think the 1980 hunger strike was one of those events that reinforced our views of the Brits, that any agreement with the British government always needs to be signed, sealed and delivered. And it's the delivery that they never do. So how did you feel? How do you feel in terms of reflecting back at that time and then what unfolded afterwards?
I mean, I think we all share that sense of relief. There's no doubt. Like, I mean, I have a very clear recollection of Brenton stopping myself and Leo in the corridor. I mean, so, I mean, I've often talked about the bewilderment. I mean, because you weren't sure, and you know, you possibly had no sort of sense how it was going to end anyway. No, there was no blueprint for this. There's absolutely no doubt, you know, that the document, the substance of the document, was down to whether or not people were going to come at this with good faith. I think we showed, because for us, it was about the welfare of each other. And I think, you know, Bobby Sands was exemplary. His patience, his approach, and he went at it. But obviously, this was an opportunity which the Brits, because from their point of view, they possibly would have felt that the hunger strike was called off before we had the document. So therefore, they were in a better position to try and outmaneuver us. But I think, you know, and they would have read the mood of the nationalist people. They would have been thinking that it would be impossible to replicate the 53 days of protest which they had seen before. On hindsight, as we look back on these things, you know, there's no doubt there were many lessons learned. They were learned very, very quickly. They were learned for the second hunger strike. Bobby Sands laid it out very, very clearly. You know, that even the way that the hunger strike was embarked upon, Bobby went on his own. He left a gap of 2 weeks. Clear definition of leadership, clear definition of how it will be resolved, and the substance and the manner, because we know, and we'll discuss that, I'm sure, as time unfolds. But when you look back at it, there's always that sort of, I remember one night doing a discussion and with a group of ex-prisoners and their families in Ardoyne many, many years later, and we talked about this, and there's absolutely no doubt about it, that period, to me, that even the end of hunger strike and the aftermath manifests to me what comradeship's all about. You know, people seeing the welfare of their comrades as foremost, and always being mindful of that when they were making observations. And I likened it, you know, to me, it was a case of, you know, that someone throws you the ball, you know, and you have to catch it, you know, and through no fault of your own, the ball, you know, slips out of your hands. And that's the feeling, I think, that certainly I had as events unfolded in the second hunger strike. And we seen, and as I say, we'll speak about this in the future, there was a very clear, certain framework that perhaps wasn't there in 1980, and that's not a criticism. That's just an observation, which obviously, as we do in every situation we find ourselves, we analyse it, and then we get stronger for the next step forward.
I could listen to you three all night, and I want to thank you for just affording us all the opportunity to relive that period of time with each of you. I want to thank you for your openness, your honesty, and your integrity. The 1981 hunger strike and all that unfolded, that's for another time, another event. But for now, can I say to each of you, go Romina Mayagaf Galer, thank you all very much. And can we all thank all of you very much for staying tuned.